The Earth is still hiding secrets in 2025. Some are written in stone, others shimmer below the ocean, and a few burn endlessly without explanation. We now have satellites peering into places no one has ever stepped, drones scanning ancient patterns, and divers uncovering creatures in pitch-black trenches. Yet, the mysteries remain, only growing stranger with every discovery. Today, we're counting down 50 of the most baffling places on the planet, updated with new science, visitor numbers, and hidden dangers that weren't known until now. The door to hell, Turkmenistan. In the middle of Turkmenistan's Karakum Desert sits a crater that has been burning continuously since 1971. The ground collapsed during Soviet gas drilling, and flames were set to consume leaking methane. Over half a century later, the fire still rises, a circle of heat and smoke that locals call the door to hell. By 2025, the site is at a crossroads. Scientists now measure the methane that continues to escape, not only from the crater, but from surrounding ground fissures. Their findings tie the site to broader concerns about greenhouse gases in the region. This has placed pressure on Turkmenistan, which recently pledged to reduce leaking natural gas. That promise immediately sparked speculation that the crater's flames might be extinguished, ending a mistake that became a landmark. Tourism complicates the conversation. More than 15,000 visitors now come each year, despite the lack of paved roads or facilities. Some arrive to see fire in open desert, others come chasing rumors. Biologists, meanwhile, discovered extremophiles thriving near the edges, microorganisms adapted to survive extreme heat and toxic gas. Whether celebrated, studied, or threatened with closure, the fire remains a national contradiction, still burning into its uncertain future. Antikythera mechanism shipwreck. Beneath the waters off the Greek island of Antikythera lies a shipwreck that refuses to stop surprising archaeologists. Over a century ago, divers brought up corroded bronze fragments that would later be recognized as pieces of the Antikythera mechanism. A device so intricate it looked more like the work of a Renaissance clockmaker than something built in ancient Greece. For years, analysis was limited to what little survived, leaving more questions than answers. Between 2023 and 2025, new excavations returned to the wreck with modern equipment. Divers recovered additional bronze statues, shards of amphorae, and even fragments of human teeth preserved in seabed sediments. Most importantly, researchers found more gear components that expanded the known layout of the mechanism. These pieces helped confirm that the device likely included functions far beyond astronomy alone. Early computer models hinted at planetary cycles, but artificial intelligence reconstructions now suggest it may have served as a portable system for tracking calendars and navigation. The wreck site itself rests too deep for tourism, but its replicas displayed in Athens and London attract record crowds. What once looked like random corroded scraps now stands revealed as an ancient machine assembled with startling precision. Nazca lines, Peru. Across the desert plateau of southern Peru stretch enormous figures etched into the ground, lines that can only be appreciated from high above. For decades, planes revealed the condors, monkeys, and spirals already known, but the past few years have added a surprising twist. Since 2020, fleets of drones working with artificial intelligence have scanned wide swaths of barren land and identified dozens of new outlines never recorded before. Shapes of cats crouching, fish carved in profile, and even humanoid forms appear faintly in the soil, their age estimated to be over 1,000 years. Technology doesn't just find new figures, it also warns of how quickly they degrade. Heavy rains that swept southern Peru in 2023 washed away segments already weakened by erosion, and satellite mapping now pinpoints exactly where further loss is most likely. Authorities responded by limiting access, cutting down on off-road vehicles, and preventing tourists from straying too close. The region's communities welcome visitors, but also recognize that local economies depend on a heritage that is fragile. Each time another geoglyph is revealed, the list of what needs protection grows, reminding us the Nazca Desert still hides more secrets than we imagined. Stonehenge, UK. On the plains of southern England, the circle of stones, known as Stonehenge, has been studied for generations. Yet the ground beneath it still holds hidden clues. In 2024, a survey using ground-penetrating radar exposed the remains of large wooden posts buried nearby. They form a pattern suggesting gathering spaces far bigger than the ring of stones itself, expanding its role from an isolated monument to part of a much larger ceremonial zone. Archaeologists point to evidence of solstice rituals, but not just in the form of stone alignments. Animal bones and cooking pits unearthed near the site connect the area to community feasts, activities that may have tied scattered groups together at specific times of year. The picture becomes less of lone stones in a field and more of a busy hub where rituals, food, and astronomy merged into a single calendar of life. Tourism has also reshaped the site story. By 2024, more than 1.6 million people visited in a single year, enough traffic to put stress on fragile Earth. Conservation managers now restrict walking areas and invest in virtual reality tours, ensuring that Stonehenge still functions as both a stage for gatherings and a window into prehistoric intention. Area 51, USA. In Nevada's barren desert, hidden behind barren ridges and long stretches of fence, stands one of the most guarded patches of land in the United States. Area 51 has long been the focus of speculation, but even in 2025, its reputation is less about what is known and more about what remains cordoned off. The base is still surrounded by sensors buried in the sand, remote patrols, and cameras that no tourist will ever glimpse, and its airspace continues to stay permanently off-limits. Even with satellites scanning every corner of the globe, digital maps blur or obscure the perimeter. The government has softened some edges, though, releasing files that describe Cold War projects and more recent weapons trials. Among them are records of drone designs tested here in the early 2000s. For researchers, these shed light on early unmanned flight innovations. But for conspiracy enthusiasts, they fold neatly into long-running UFO theories, fueling a belief that the veil never truly lifts. Nearby, the small town of Rachel has seen tourism steadily climb since the storm Area 51 craze. Despite the influx, visitors still find themselves stopped at distant warning signs, never close enough to see what truly hides inside. Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle covers a stretch of the Atlantic connecting Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. For decades, its name carried stories of missing ships and planes. But in 2025, the reality looks very different on paper. Modern tracking shows more than 200,000 vessels crossing those waters every year, an enormous amount of cargo, cruise liners, and private craft moving through without incident. Air traffic is just as heavy, with commercial flights crisscrossing the region daily. Thanks to GPS navigation and satellite monitoring, airlines now record zero unexplained disappearances. The last traceable events date back to a time before standardized communication systems became reliable. Researchers argue the myths had roots in genuine risks. Methane trapped in seafloor deposits can erupt in violent bursts, reducing water density enough to sink a vessel without warning. Rogue waves, now confirmed through satellite data, can rise over 30 meters high, dwarfing ships in moments. Both phenomena are real, but also measurable, no longer beyond scientific explanation. Still, tourism operates on mystery, not just data. Cruise operators in the Caribbean run triangle tours, and coastal towns advertise ghost voyages and disappearance lore, ensuring the legend never truly fades. Easter Island, Chile. Far out in the Pacific, Easter Island is most famous for rows of Moai, stone statues carved centuries ago by the Rapa Nui people. But in 2025, the greatest threat to these figures isn't vandalism or quarrying. It's the changing climate itself. Rising seas lap closer to the platforms along the coast, and storms have grown stronger every year since 2020. Sections of Ahu Tongariki, the island's largest ceremonial platform, collapsed during a surge in 2022, forcing emergency restoration teams to stabilize weakened stonework. Salt water now seeps into cracks, breaking down the volcanic rock. When waves pound against the island during storm season, fragments loosen, and restorers scramble to reinforce the statues before more damage appears. To limit human pressure, Chile capped the number of annual visitors at roughly 100,000, far less than what had been reached before the pandemic. Access points are stricter, with paths designed to keep feet away from fragile ground. At the center of these measures are Rapa Nui communities, balancing tourism with rituals still practiced today. The Moai remain symbols of their ancestry, but in 2025, they also stand as one of the world's most visible examples of heritage at risk from climate change. Mariana Trench. At nearly 11,000 meters deep, the Mariana Trench is the lowest point on Earth's seafloor, and as of 2025, it continues to produce discoveries that sound more like science fiction than science. Recent submersible dives recorded organisms resembling translucent jellyfish, but instead of soft bodies, these creatures display thin, glassy skeletons that bend light in the darkness. Their survival at such crushing pressures suggests unknown biochemical strategies that researchers are still trying to decode. Sediment samples add another surprise. Chemical traces from the lowest sections reveal microbes breaking down plastic particles that drift down from the surface world above. With plastic pollution reaching even these depths, scientists now monitor how these unusual microbes metabolize it, raising questions about whether similar adaptations could evolve in other isolated ecosystems. Exploration itself looks different than it did even a decade ago. Instead of relying solely on manned submarines, autonomous drones now patrol the trench for weeks at a time, operating far below 10,000 meters while streaming data back to surface ships. The information they gather is already being compared to icy oceans under Europa and Enceladus, where alien life might face similar challenges. Poveglia Island, Italy. A short trip from Venice leads to an island few Italians want to set foot on. Poveglia sits empty on the lagoon, locked behind official bans and warning signs. Its reputation comes from history that reads more like a punishment than a past. In the 18th century, it became a dumping ground for plague victims, where thousands were left in isolation and mass cremations filled the soil with human remains. Later, in the 20th century, the site reopened as a psychiatric hospital until closing for good in 1968. Since then, buildings decay in silence, while rumors multiply around them. By 2025, that silence carries enforcement. Police patrol the waters to push back tour boats and prevent guides from sneaking ashore. The precaution is not just about superstition. Soil studies confirm that large portions of the ground contain up to 50% human ash, making the island effectively a giant burial site. Despite this, online videos showing daring trespasses keep luring thrill seekers. Paranormal tourism flourishes in digital spaces, even as real access remains firmly closed. Poveglia today is less abandoned than contested, caught between preservation law and stories that refuse to die. The Catacombs of Paris. Beneath the streets of Paris stretches a hidden city of the dead. The catacombs hold the bones of nearly 6 million people, their skulls and femurs stacked in meticulous walls that line long tunnels. What visitors walk today amounts to only a fraction of the whole, but the sense of scale is hard to grasp without knowing what lies beyond. In 2022, urban explorers stumbled across disconnected chambers not mapped before, plastered with faded graffiti dating back to the 19th century. These areas had likely been sealed off for decades, filled with carved inscriptions and forgotten passageways. Each new find hints that the underground network may still be larger and stranger than the records suggest. Current estimates place the catacombs and adjoining quarry systems at nearly 300 kilometers in length. Official tours, however, allow access to just 2 kilometers, both for safety and to preserve what remains intact. After several collapses threaten homes and streets above, Paris stepped up patrols and enforcement in 2025. Teams now use 3D scanning to model the voids, creating digital blueprints that monitor structural risk. Centuries later, the city above still depends on constant vigilance underground. Lake Hillier, Australia. From above, Lake Hillier looks almost unreal, a patch of bubblegum pink outlined against the dark green of Middle Island's forest. The color is no trick of the light, nor is it due to minerals staining the water. Recent genetic sequencing carried out in 2024 confirmed that its brightness comes from living organisms. A combination of salt-tolerant algae, halobacteria, and other microbes produce pigments that mix together in a way that keeps the lake glowing even when samples are bottled and viewed indoors. Unlike many seasonal lakes, Hillier's color doesn't vanish, though its intensity can change with the climate. During hotter summers, evaporation pushes salt levels even higher, and as salinity rises, pigment production by these microbes increases. The water deepens into a stronger pink, almost resembling dye poured straight into the basin. That biological process is stable, but the lake's surroundings are not free of stress. By 2025, new restrictions limited drones flying overhead, since growing numbers of nesting seabirds were being disturbed by buzzing cameras. Visitors remain carefully managed. Travel is possible by air tours or on supervised boat trips, but swimming is prohibited. Scientists understand the pigment chemistry now, yet Lake Hillier's balance remains delicate. The Zone of Silence, Mexico. In the middle of Mexico's Mapamay Desert lies a stretch of land where electronics fail, compasses swing without direction, and radio signals fade into nothing. This is the Zone of Silence, a place where geography and geology come together in ways that still confuse casual visitors, and for decades, encouraged rumors of something supernatural at work. In 2023, researchers returned to the site with updated electromagnetic equipment. Their surveys tracked the cause not to unseen forces in the sky, but to basaltic rocks scattered beneath the desert floor. These stones, loaded with magnetic minerals, produce interference that disrupts transmissions and causes confusion for anyone relying on radio or navigation. With satellite data layered on top, scientists map geomagnetic quirks that link loosely to a much broader anomaly stretching northward across the continent. A line conspiracy enthusiasts can't help but connect to the Bermuda Triangle. Despite skepticism, a government observatory nearby still studies the anomaly, collecting atmospheric data and monitoring disturbances. Locals, though, share another view. They describe glowing orbs that appear over the desert at night, lights that, explained or not, keep the Zone of Silence firmly in the territory between science and folklore. Socotra Island, Yemen. In the Arabian Sea lies Socotra, a remote island that often gets called the most alien-looking place on Earth. Rough limestone bluffs and sandy plains are scattered with dragon blood trees, umbrella-shaped giants that ooze a crimson resin. They are just one example of the island's extraordinary collection of plants and animals. Surveys show that over 1/3 of its species exist nowhere else, from rare succulents clinging to cliffs to unique birds that have adapted to its isolated environment. Yet the same isolation that preserved this diversity now leaves it vulnerable. Since 2020, the ongoing conflict in Yemen has halted almost all ecotourism. That sudden absence of outside money means conservation projects are underfunded, while goat grazing and drought keep wearing down fragile habitats. In 2025, new biodiversity assessments warn that localized extinctions may already be underway as young dragon blood trees fail to mature and rare reptiles vanish from shrinking ranges. Because on-the-ground work remains limited, UNESCO shifted focus towards satellite monitoring. These orbital surveys track vegetation loss and soil changes without requiring researchers in the field. Socotra continues to stand as both a living treasure chest and an ecosystem perched on the edge of survival. The Moeraki Boulders, New Zealand. On Cocoa Beach in New Zealand, the sand is scattered with smooth stone spheres so large they could pass for toys left behind by giants. Locals and visitors alike have long speculated about their strange symmetry, but by 2024, geologists confirmed the process that produced them. These are concretions, formed as calcite slowly accumulated around hardened centers inside ancient seabeds. Layer after layer built outward across millions of years until the massive round boulders we see today emerged from eroding cliffs. Recent storms, however, have reminded researchers how fragile they are. Surging waves shifted several of the larger boulders and caused visible cracks, sparking immediate preservation measures. Teams began repairing fractures with stabilizing compounds and positioning protective barriers to reduce further damage during tidal surges. While their geological story fascinates scientists, the cultural importance is equally strong. In Maori tradition, these stones are linked to a mythic canoe wreck, said to represent gourds and eel baskets that washed ashore and turned to stone. Because they are both scientific specimens and cultural symbols, visitors are now restricted from climbing on them. Clear paths and fences enforce viewing from a distance, so these near-perfect spheres remain intact for the future. Racetrack Playa, USA. In the middle of Death Valley's Racetrack Playa, stones appear to have minds of their own. They slide slowly across the dried lake bed, leaving long tracks etched into the mud as if pulled by invisible hands. For decades, the shifting rocks fueled speculation. Some blamed magnetic fields, others suggested pranksters, and plenty were content to pin it on the supernatural. But for years, no one had proof of what actually moved the stones. That changed in 2022 when high-definition cameras were set along the playa. They caught rare conditions at work. After a stretch of heavy rain, shallow water froze overnight. In the morning sun, thin ice sheets broke into large panels, and with just a push of wind, those panels acted as sails. The ice dragged the stones at a slow crawl, sometimes for hundreds of feet, leaving their famous trails behind. By 2025, the scientific debate ended. The mystery rests not in hidden forces, but in the chemistry of frozen films and desert wind. Still, the marks remain delicate. Rangers now enforce restrictions to keep vehicles off the playa, preserving tracks that still look eerie even when the trick is understood. The Blood Falls, Antarctica. In Antarctica, at the edge of Taylor Glacier, a stream oozes out that looks more like blood than water. Locals call it Blood Falls, and from above it appears as if the ice itself is weeping. A wound into Lake Bonny. The strange color comes from iron-rich brine, trapped miles below the glacier for millions of years, finally seeping through cracks and turning red when it meets oxygen. But in recent years, what's inside the water has proven far stranger than its surface. In 2023, sequencing of the brine revealed microbial lineages never seen before. These organisms thrive in extreme salt concentrations, total darkness, and sub-zero temperatures. Their chemistry depends not on sunlight, but on chemical reactions with sulfur and iron, a survival strategy far removed from anything most life on Earth uses. For scientists, the stunning part is how long it has remained sealed. Over 2 million years without contact with the world above. Climate models, though, suggest that by 2050 increasing ice melt could disrupt this environment entirely. Researchers now point to Blood Falls as a test case for what hidden oceans on Europa or Enceladus might look like. Alive, ancient, and alien. Kawah Ijen, Indonesia. High on the slopes of East Java stands Kawah Ijen, a volcanic crater that glows with a phenomenon few places on Earth can match. At night, blue fire pours from cracks in the rock as sulfuric gases burst into flames at temperatures over 600 degrees Celsius. The flames never appear as gentle light. They flare, hiss, and roll down the slope like liquid fire. Tourists often describe it as walking through a surreal torchlight, but the origin is fully chemical, not magical. This fire burns above one of the harshest bodies of water known. The crater lake, stretching across the caldera, is the largest pool of acid anywhere on Earth. Its pH measures below 1, so acidic it can dissolve clothes, skin, and metal with ease. Steam rises constantly from the surface, carrying particles capable of burning the lungs when inhaled. For locals, Kawah Ijen is not only a wonder, but also a workplace. Hundreds of sulfur miners risk the climb daily, hauling baskets of yellow or while breathing toxic fumes. Increased volcanic activity in 2023 and 2024 worsened their conditions, leading Indonesia to enforce stricter tourist safety regulations in 2025. The Skeleton Lake, India. High in the Indian Himalayas sits Rupkund, a small alpine lake better known as Skeleton Lake. When the snow thaws, its banks reveal hundreds of human bones scattered along the shoreline and beneath the water. For decades, the mystery of who these people were and how they died dominated discussion, with theories ranging from sudden avalanches to ancient battles. Yet the evidence collected since 2019 has made the story far more complicated than a single disaster. Initial DNA studies shocked researchers when they identified some skeletons with Mediterranean ancestry, a finding that clashed with the expectation of only local Himalayan groups. Rather than a single tragic event, follow-up genome sequencing in 2024 indicated that the bones represent multiple migration waves separated by centuries. Radiocarbon dating places most of the skeletons around the 9th century, but others date many hundreds of years later, showing that the site was visited and claimed lives on more than one occasion. Trekking paths to the lake, reopened in 2023, now carry strict rules on waste management and group size to prevent further environmental impact. Rupkund continues to puzzle historians, functioning as both a high-altitude graveyard and a record of human movement locked in DNA. Fly Geyser, USA. In remote northern Nevada, a fountain of scalding water rises out of the desert in reds, greens, and yellows. Fly Geyser wasn't planned. It began in the 1960s when a geothermal well was drilled, tapping into a hot aquifer. Instead of producing an energy source, the well cracked and spewed mineral-rich water onto the surface. Over decades, the flow built up colorful terraces as minerals hardened around a growing cone. By 2025, the cone itself has grown taller than a two-story building, and the water sprays through 3 separate spouts instead of the 2 seen only a decade ago. Constant deposits reshape it every year, creating a structure as much in flux as the water that powers it. Thermophilic algae thrive in the runoff channels, staining the rock in vivid streaks of green, orange, and red. Because it sits on private land managed by the Burning Man Project, access is restricted. Tours are limited, require reservations, and the fees fund preservation. This control is necessary, as scientists also track the aquifers below, concerned that overtapping nearby wells could destabilize the geyser's pressure. What started with drilling error now functions as a hybrid of geology, biology, and accident. The Spotted Lake, Canada. In the interior of British Columbia lies a shallow body of water that, in summer, transforms into something that looks unnatural at first sight. Spotted Lake earns its name from the dozens of vivid circles that appear when the hot season forces much of the water to evaporate. What remains are bright mineral basins, each sitting in clear contrast to its neighbor, with colors shifting from blue to green to yellow depending on what minerals dominate the pool. A geochemical survey completed in 2024 gave a precise picture of what fills those circles. The basins concentrate magnesium sulfate, calcium, and small amounts of other dissolved salts to levels rarely found in surface lakes. Their uneven distribution is what produces the spotted appearance across the lake bed. The result isn't paint or algae, but pure chemistry written into water and soil. For the local Okanagan people, though, Spotted Lake is less about science and more about meaning. It is regarded as a sacred place of healing, where traditions link the pools to peace and renewal. Authorities now prohibit swimming or close contact. Visitors may only view it from designated perimeters, leaving both minerals and memories untouched. Socotra dragon trees. On Socotra Island, the most recognizable shape is the dragon blood tree, its canopy stretching wide like a giant umbrella held against the sky. These trees are more than unusual silhouettes. They bleed a deep red resin when cut, a substance that for centuries has been used in traditional medicine, dyes, and rituals. For the people of the island, the resin carries cultural weight. But for scientists today, the concern is not about its use. It is about the tree's survival. Satellite surveys released in 2025 show a sharp decline of mature stands, down an estimated 35% since 2010. The drivers are clear. Drought weakens the soil's ability to support new seedlings, and constant grazing by goats strips away young growth before it can take root. As a result, seeds sprout but rarely reach adulthood, leaving aging forests with few replacements waiting in the underbrush. Conservationists have responded with controlled nurseries and cloning projects, raising saplings in protected conditions before planting them back onto ridge lines. For now, that is the only way to push against the trend. These strange, alien-looking trees now depend on direct human care to hold on in their native land. The sailing stones. In the middle of dry desert lake beds, heavy stones appear to move on their own, sliding silently across flat ground and leaving trails behind them. These sailing stones sparked arguments for decades, with theories ranging from magnetic pulls to pranksters moving rocks at night. The problem was simple. Nobody had actually seen the motion happen. The stones stood still, but the evidence of movement stretched out all around them. Patience and technology finally bridged the gap. In Nevada and California, researchers set up time-lapse cameras in 2022 and captured the stones in action. The footage showed an unusual chain of events. Rain briefly covered the Playa in shallow water, which froze into thin sheets of ice overnight. When the sun rose, those panels cracked and drifted under wind pressure. The ice sheets pushed rocks forward in slow surges, dragging scratches across the ground like glacial tracks altered on a miniature scale. By 2023, video compilations confirming the motion spread widely online, ending many arguments. Similar cases then appeared in places like Egyptian deserts, suggesting the effect is not regional but global. Silent lake beds now display one of the planet's oddest illusions, caught unmistakably on camera. Magnetic hill phenomena. On certain roads around the world, cars seem to break the rules of physics. Drivers put their vehicles in neutral and watch them creep uphill, as if pulled by some unseen magnetic force. The most famous example lies near Leh in northern India. Here, roads lined by barren hills draw thousands of curious visitors each year. By 2024, more than 200,000 people travel the stretch, eager to test the gravity hill for themselves. When a car coasts upward against expectation, the mind leaps to forces far beyond science. But careful measurement clears the mystery. Surveyors found that the surrounding landscape creates a distorted horizon. Trees lean oddly, road edges slope in hidden ways, and distant hills misguide the eye. Together, they create an optical illusion where a downward slope is mistaken for an upward climb. Cars aren't being lifted by anything unusual. They are simply obeying gravity on ground that is not what it appears to be. Similar magnetic hills exist in Canada and the United States, often attracting the same mix of skeptical scientists and wide-eyed tourists. The real trick isn't magnetism at all. It's human perception bending as easily as the slope beneath the tires. Fairy circles of Namibia. Across the arid grasslands of Namibia, the soil is punctuated with bare circular patches that stretch out in regular patterns, often dozens of meters wide and spaced almost evenly across the desert. These formations, known as fairy circles, appear so mathematically precise that many first-time viewers assume they must be artificial. Yet they form naturally, leaving scientists to argue for decades about what forces are shaping them. One long-standing theory points to termites. Colonies living beneath the surface may kill off vegetation to create open zones, leaving the surrounding rim of grass taller and greener. Another explanation, just as persistent, argues that plants have organized themselves this way to conserve scarce water. By spacing apart in neat patterns, grasses can maximize use of limited soil moisture while preventing rivals from drawing the same supply. As of 2023, satellite rainfall records added clarity. They showed evidence that plant self-organization indeed corresponds tightly with soil water distribution. Yet excavations still keep uncovering termite activity inside many circles, making it clear that neither explanation works alone. Visitors describe the site as eerie order imposed on wilderness, a field where soil, roots, and insects collaborate in patterns that remain oddly unsettled. Moval Cave, Romania. Beneath a quiet field in Romania, a narrow shaft drops into one of the strangest ecosystems on Earth. Moval Cave has been sealed from the surface for over 5 million years. No sunlight enters, no weather ever shifts its chambers, and yet an entire world of life has formed inside. The air itself is unlike anywhere else, with oxygen levels stuck at just 7%, less than half of what humans normally breathe. and a heavy presence of hydrogen sulfide filling the darkness. Instead of energy from the sun, bacteria in the cave survive by chemosynthesis, feeding on sulfur compounds rising from the rock. This chemical foundation supports a food chain with more than 60 unique species of invertebrates, many found nowhere else. Most are blind, colorless, and completely adapted to the darkness. Centipedes, leeches, spiders, and other small creatures dominate. Each evolved to withstand the cave's toxic atmosphere. NASA has helped fund recent studies, using Moai as a real-world guide for how life might exist beneath the icy shells of Europa or Enceladus. Entry to the cave remains tightly restricted. Scientists only descend with breathing equipment, leaving this alien biosphere hidden under ordinary farmland. The Crooked Forest, Poland. In western Poland, not far from the town of Gryfino, stands a forest that looks entirely ordinary until you notice the shape of its trees. About 400 pines bend low near their bases, then curve upward in a smooth arc before rising straight again. Each one tilts in almost the same direction, as if some invisible hand pushed them sideways when they were young. No storm, landslide, or natural disaster would create a formation that uniform, which is what keeps the Crooked Forest firmly in the category of deliberate human influence. The trees were planted in the 1930s, and for decades, explanations were mostly speculation. In 2023, dendrochronology studies confirmed what many suspected. The trunks had been intentionally manipulated early in their growth. The most convincing theory is that the unusual curves were cultivated to create bent timber, useful for shipbuilding or for forming wooden yokes. That project was apparently abandoned during the upheaval of the Second World War, leaving the grove half-finished, with trees continuing their growth after the initial bend. Since 2022, the area has become a quiet stop for ecotourism, with walking paths and signs guiding curious visitors through this strange legacy of interrupted plans. Lake Natron, Tanzania. In northern Tanzania, Lake Natron spreads out like a shallow red mirror. Its strange reputation comes from its chemistry. The water carries an alkaline pH that can exceed 10, high enough to preserve or calcify any bird or animal that falls in. Photos often show corpses hardened like statues along the shore, a reminder that this lake can transform living creatures into stone-like remains. Yet, against this backdrop of hostility, Lake Natron is one of the most important flamingo habitats on Earth. Greater flamingos return each year in massive numbers to breed, building mud nests on the lake's salty surface. Roughly 75% of the world's population relies on this single basin to raise chicks. Their pink coloring, already vivid, becomes almost electric in these alkaline waters, where food rich in carotenoids supports the birds during their most critical season. Conditions grow harsher each year. In 2024, shoreline temperatures soared past 50 degrees Celsius, making both nesting and chick survival more difficult. Conservation groups now juggle the challenge of protecting fragile colonies while allowing ecotourism that sustains local economies. The paradox remains. Lake Natron is both a deadly trap and one of life's greatest strongholds. The Chocolate Hills, Philippines. Across the island of Bohol in the Philippines rises a landscape so orderly it looks manufactured from above. The Chocolate Hills stretch across more than 50 square kilometers, with over 1,000 cone-shaped mounds that mirror each other in size and symmetry. In the wet season, they glow bright green with grass, but once the heat sets in, the vegetation fades, leaving the hills a dry brown, the contrast that gave them their name. Geologists agree the formation began millions of years ago, when marine limestone pushed upward from tectonic activity. Rain and erosion carved the surfaces evenly, stripping the softer layers until only near-identical cones were left. That unusual consistency has made them an icon of Philippine geology, a feature both striking and puzzling in its regularity. Tourism has surged in recent years. By 2023, climbing access became so frequent that erosion threatened the fragile hillsides, forcing authorities to impose strict rules on where visitors can walk and view the site. Local legends persist alongside science, with stories telling of a giant whose tears turned solid, creating the landscape. Between folklore and geology, the Chocolate Hills remain rooted in both national identity and the global tourism map. Salar de Uyuni, Bolivia. At over 10,000 square kilometers, Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia is the largest salt flat on Earth. For much of the year, its surface looks like a cracked, white plain patterned with hexagons of salt. But when seasonal rains cover the flats in shallow water, the landscape flips into a giant mirror. Sky and ground merge, creating the photographic illusion that draws tourists from around the world. Jeep tours remain the main way to cross the expanse, ferrying thousands of travelers each year despite the isolation and altitude. What lies beneath that striking surface has put the Salar at the center of global debate. Hidden under layers of brine are massive lithium reserves, one of the largest known anywhere. As demand for electric vehicles grows, governments and companies see Salar de Uyuni not only as a natural wonder, but as an industrial resource worth billions. In 2024, public discussion in Bolivia focused heavily on how far mining expansion should go and what it might cost the regions that rely on tourism. By 2025, Salar de Uyuni is both a scientific marvel and a commercial battleground, reflecting the conflict between economic necessity and environmental protection. The Wave, USA. In northern Arizona, tucked within the Vermilion Cliffs, lies a sandstone formation that looks like a ripple frozen mid-motion. Called the Wave, its striated walls rise and curve in bands of red and gold, shaped by wind and water over millions of years. The place has become a photographer's dream, but its popularity in recent years has forced strict limits on who gets to see it in person. By 2023, the permit system shifted to an online lottery. Instead of only a handful gaining access, rules expanded to allow 64 visitors per day. That figure may sound generous, but demand is so high that thousands apply for those spots, many leaving disappointed. On the ground, rangers continue to monitor conditions closely, since every step risks scarring surfaces that take centuries to recover. Wind already erodes the fragile rock, and with boot traffic added, unchecked access could undo the very reason people come. Drone bans came in 2024 after repeated crashes, protecting both safety and the view itself. The Wave photographs beautifully, but standing there means navigating a system of rules designed to keep it intact for eyes that have not yet seen it. Giant's Causeway, Ireland. Along the coast of County Antrim in Northern Ireland, thousands of hexagonal rock columns rise from the shoreline and stretch into the waves. This striking pavement of stone is the Giant's Causeway, one of the most unusual volcanic formations on Earth. Around 50 million years ago, lava flows erupted across this area. As the molten basalt cooled, it contracted and fractured into neat angles, leaving behind the columns that now form step-like patterns leading straight to the sea. The geometry seems too precise to be a product of cooling rock, which is why older legends filled in the gaps. The most famous claims these stones were set down by the giant Finn McCool, intended as the beginning of a bridge to Scotland. The myth stuck, giving a human story to a process that geology alone explains. In reality, the stones face challenges not imagined in folklore. Over 1 million visitors came in 2024, putting pressure on the fragile edges of the site. Erosion and heavy foot traffic forced the construction of protective seawalls and elevated paths. These new measures keep visitors above the most vulnerable sections, preserving a landmark where science and story stand side by side. The blue holes. Blue holes look like ordinary lagoons from above, but they are anything but shallow. These ocean sinkholes plunge hundreds of meters down into sudden darkness, their entrances hidden in the reefs of places like Belize and the Bahamas. To stand over one is to see water turn into a vertical tunnel, leading straight into a world cut off from light and air. In 2018, Belize's Great Blue Hole was mapped in detail using manned submersibles. But the most recent push from 2022 to 2025 has shifted attention to the Bahamas. Dives there revealed something far more complex than empty shafts of water. At depths of around 100 meters, diverse documented thick mats of bacteria feeding directly on hydrogen sulfide. The gas forms toxic layers that would kill most marine life, Yet here microbial colonies thrive, shaping a completely isolated ecosystem. The same caves also hold a human past. Archaeologists found tools and preserved remains within certain blue holes, evidence that people once crossed landscapes, which are now underwater. Taken together, these sites function as three things at once: a record of ancient climate shifts, a hidden grave of human migration, and a lethal marine laboratory still unfolding. Antelope Canyon, USA. In northern Arizona, carved into Navajo land, is Antelope Canyon. It looks serene in photographs, narrow walls twisting into smooth ribbons of sandstone. But the same water that sculpted its shapes is also what makes it dangerous. Flash floods continue to be the greatest risk here. Storms miles away can funnel into the Slot Canyon, sending walls of water rushing through at speeds strong enough to sweep away anyone inside with no warning. This risk has grown sharper in recent years. Between 2022 and 2024, heavier monsoon rains forced Navajo authorities to tighten closure schedules. Tours now shut down earlier in the season, and weather monitoring has become a constant condition for opening the canyon at all. Access is no longer casual. Guides check forecasts and close gates at the first hint of rain. Photography rules have also shifted. The canyon's walls are famous for producing light beams and shadows, but the surge of tripods blocking paths became a safety issue. By 2025, tripods were fully banned, leaving only guided groups that move in smaller numbers. What remains is still remarkable: sandstone art shaped not by hand, but by violent, sudden waters. The Rick Hat structure, Mauritania. In the center of Mauritania's desert lies a formation so large it can only be grasped from far above. Called the Rick Hat structure, or more popularly, the Eye of the Sahara. It spans over 40 kilometers across and appears as concentric rings pressed into the desert floor. From the window of a spacecraft, it looks like a bullseye cut into miles of sand, geometric, defined, and out of place against the endless dunes. For years, the unusual pattern fed speculation. Some believed it must have been caused by a massive meteor impact, a scar left after a collision from space. Others imagined lost ruins hidden under the rings. Geologists, however, demonstrated that the feature is not extraterrestrial, but geologic. The formation is the product of uplift and erosion, as softer rocks wore away in layers over millions of years, leaving behind alternating rings of sandstone and quartzite. The symmetry is striking, but it is entirely natural. Astronauts continue to photograph the structure as they pass overhead, and its images appear frequently in orbital surveys. On the ground, tourism is limited, with small desert caravans occasionally routing trips past it. Nature alone designed geometry that rivals architecture. McMurdo Dry Valleys, Antarctica. In Antarctica, the McMurdo Dry Valleys stretch across a frozen continent, but appear almost ice-free. They are the coldest desert on Earth, locked between glaciers, yet bare of snow, because winds scour the surface dry. The landscape is stark rock and gravel, broken only by thin melt streams that appear briefly in the summer before disappearing again. Despite the near absence of water, microbial communities manage to persist, clinging to life in soils where oxygen is scarce and liquid moisture lasts only hours at a time. For scientists, this makes the dry valleys more than just a curiosity. They are a field laboratory that mimics conditions found on Mars. NASA teams use the valleys to test rover navigation and sampling techniques, since the harsh surface stands as the closest parallel to extraterrestrial terrain available on Earth. By 2025, robotics trials and biological experiments focus directly on how missions might detect signs of life on other planets. Temperature records from 2023 complicate that picture. Sensors caught notable warming, enough to create trickles of water flowing down valley floors. These shifts remind researchers that Earth's only true Mars analog is already beginning to change. The underwater river Mexico. In Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, beneath ordinary-looking jungle ground, lies a cave network unlike anything else on Earth. These cenotes, limestone sinkholes filled with water, connect to an immense labyrinth of submerged passages. By 2024, divers had mapped out kilometers of these tunnels, eventually linking them into what is now recognized as the longest known underwater cave system. The mapping revealed routes stretching far beyond what anyone suspected, turning once isolated pools into entrances to a single hidden river. The flow itself creates a striking visual. Fresh water from rainfall sinks through porous limestone and forms a turquoise layer at the surface. Beneath it rests heavier saline ocean water, intruding from the coast. When seen underwater, the division is clear, like one river floating atop another. Moving through these zones feels less like swimming in a single body of water and more like slipping between two stacked worlds. Such beauty carries undeniable risk. Several fatalities in 2022 showed how quickly a diver can lose direction underground, prompting new permit rules and mandatory training before entry. Strict gear standards are now enforced. The cenotes remain breathtaking, but survival depends on respecting the hidden river's dangers. Zhangye, China. In northwestern China, the Zhangye landform exposes rock layers that look too patterned to be natural. Ridges and slopes display striations in shades of red, orange, yellow, and even green. These colors come not from surface staining, but from mineral deposits stacked in distinct layers. Over more than 24 million years, iron oxide and other compounds built up in sedimentary rock, each layer compacted and then tilted by shifting tectonic plates. Erosion scraped away softer surfaces, leaving behind slopes that resemble painted ribbons stretched over entire mountainsides. The striking appearance has turned the site into one of China's most visible geotourism attractions. By 2024, official counts showed the number of visitors crossing 2 million in a single year. Trails and viewing platforms became crowded enough that footpaths began to erode, wearing down patches of fragile sediment. In response, conservation authorities in 2023 upgraded the park with stricter access controls, closing old paths and routing tourists only along reinforced walkways. Photographs of Zhangye circulate worldwide, but the real challenge now lies in balancing its visibility with its preservation. The rock layers remain stable only if human pressure is controlled, making popularity its biggest threat. The glowing beaches. Along specific stretches of coastline, nightfall can flip the ocean into something that looks alive with electricity. In the Maldives, Puerto Rico, and Taiwan, waves and footprints glow blue when disturbed, as if the water itself contains hidden lights. The source is biological. Tiny plankton and ostracods release bioluminescent chemicals when agitated, making the shorelines appear stitched with sparks. It's not constant, but when conditions align, warm water, steady nutrients, and calm seas, the glow can stretch for kilometers. The surge of interest in recent years carried its own damage. By 2024, beaches in Puerto Rico and the Maldives saw a flood of visitors trying to capture the glow in selfies and videos. Repeated wading and boat activity disrupted blooms and thinned their presence. Local authorities responded with new restrictions, limiting access during active seasons and reducing beach traffic after dark. Scientists now turn to satellites to track the events. Orbiting sensors detect color shifts linked to blooms, showing how warming oceans alter the timing and intensity each year. The result in 2025 is uneven displays, sometimes bright, sometimes absent altogether. The same beaches that once shone regularly now glow less predictably, caught between fragile biology and relentless human attention. Fingal's Cave, Scotland. On the uninhabited island of Staffa in Scotland, the shoreline hides an opening that looks carved but is entirely natural. Fingal's Cave stretches inward beneath a roof supported by geometric basalt columns. The formation is volcanic in origin, created millions of years ago when hot lava cooled slowly and fractured into neat hexagonal pillars. The same process that built Ireland's Giant's Causeway is repeated here, though in Scotland it forms a cavern instead of a stepping field. Access was always the hurdle. Waves often batter the entrance, and the lack of landing facilities kept tours dependent on calm seas. In 2023, new boat docking improvements were added, making it possible for more people to step safely onto the island. Visitors then make their way along narrow ledges formed by columns themselves, a path that requires steady footing but leads into one of the most unusual spaces in Europe. What sets the cave apart isn't only its shape but the sound. When waves roll inside, the air and stone combine to create deep echoes that resemble an organ playing in the dark. The result is a natural cathedral built from geometry and resonance. The door to hell alternatives. Turkmenistan's burning crater may be the most famous, but it is far from the only fire that refuses to die. In northern Iraq, the Baba Gurgur flame has been rising from the ground for thousands of years. Ancient writings describe it, and locals have watched it burn daily as oil seeps naturally through the soil. The flame is so constant that it has been used as a marker of time and ritual since the era of Babylon. Across the Mediterranean in Turkey, Yanardaz hosts another eternal blaze. Methane seeps through cracks in the ground, producing dozens of small flames that burn along the rocky slopes. The site has been known since antiquity and linked to myths of creatures breathing fire. For travelers, it has become a place where history and natural gas still show themselves in the open air. In the United States, the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, hides a different kind of flame entirely. An underground coal seam ignited in the 1960s and has burned ever since, emptying the town above until almost no one remained. Together, these examples show fire can be sustained endlessly, whether sparked by geology or human error. New Mysterious Places 2020 to 2025. Over the last few years, satellites and drones have pulled back the curtain on landscapes once thought too remote or too dense to reveal their secrets. In the Amazon, high-resolution imagery has traced geometric shapes cut into the ground beneath thick jungle canopy. These geoglyphs, invisible from the forest floor, form squares, circles, and perfect lines that suggest organized construction on a massive scale. The people behind them remain unnamed, but their outlines show that large populations once modified land that modernized thought untouched. Far north, glacial retreat has also uncovered the unexpected. In 2021, as ice sheets shrank in Greenland, explorers documented a series of newly exposed caves stretching under the ice. Hidden for centuries beneath solid walls of glacier, the formations create fresh passages through which scientists now study meltwater flow and stability of the ice cap itself. In 2024, LiDAR surveys passed over Cambodia's jungles and detected additional foundations belonging to the Angkor period. Entire temple sites appeared in relief beneath vegetation too dense for ground surveys, expanding the known map of an ancient metropolis. Each discovery underscores one point: mysteries do not only linger in ruins, they continue to surface today. Climate change impact. The mysteries of Earth aren't untouched by modern forces. Climate change is now one of the main sculptors of what survives and what fades. Rising seas and shifting weather patterns press directly against places once thought eternal. On Easter Island, the Moai statues show visible salt erosion as ocean water creeps further inland. Waves crash against platforms that once stood clear, breaking stone edges and seeping crystals into the porous rock. Entire sections already need emergency stabilization, and the tide keeps moving uphill. High in South America, Sala de Uyuni once followed steady seasonal rhythms, turning into a massive mirror only after predictable rains. But by 2025, that clock is off. Flooding now arrives earlier each year, changing how salt layers form and cutting into the predictable tourist season the flat has depended on. Meanwhile, along glowing beaches, warming seas shorten the lifespan of the tiny plankton and ostracods that create their light. The blooms arrive less reliably, and stretches once known for steady illumination now remain dark for months at a time. Far south, Antarctica responds fastest. Unique microbial habitats melt away as ice retreats, reshaping ecosystems that remain sealed for millennia. Climate itself has become the newest mystery maker. Technological advances. Every year the tools for uncovering hidden history grow sharper. Places once thought invisible are now being mapped in detail by technology that sees what human eyes cannot. From the air, drones sweep vast landscapes in hours, capturing angles impossible on the ground. LiDAR, a laser-based scanning system, strips away layers of vegetation digitally, turning dense jungles into transparent maps. On Peruvian deserts, the same method rediscovered forgotten geoglyphs etched faintly into the soil, patterns too subtle and sprawling to notice without machine precision. Artificial intelligence now handles the flood of data, organizing billions of points into structures. What once took years for teams to trace on foot is now reconstructed in days, tested against older surveys to show what shifted or remained. Machines notice symmetry and design where humans might see noise, marking lost roads, walls, and ceremonial outlines that had blurred into nature. These breakthroughs reach beyond detection. Virtual reality reconstructions now place tourists inside environments too fragile to walk. A headset delivers the view without footsteps, reducing wear on ancient soil or crumbling stone. Technology is not only unlocking secrets beneath the ground, it is creating new ways to preserve them. Travel advisories and safety. The world's most mysterious places often sit in landscapes that are as unsafe as they are fascinating. Political instability alone can shut the door on many. In 2025, entire regions remain off limits to travelers not because of geography, but because of conflict. Afghanistan's rugged valleys and plateaus carry ancient history, yet the security situation makes visits impossible for civilians. Yemen, including unique sites like Socotra, continues to be largely inaccessible due to war. Even open deserts come with warnings. The Central Sahara sees advisories against travel because of armed activity and the lack of reliable rescue if something goes wrong. But danger doesn't always come from people. Reserved cave diving spots in the Yucatan or in the Caribbean require special permits and extensive training. These passages look serene from the surface, yet once submerged, the tight tunnels turn fatal for inexperienced divers. Volcanic regions across Iceland, Indonesia, and Hawaii enforce new gear rules for tourists, requiring guides or protective wear just to approach active craters. Even the most accessible wonders can change instantly. Death Valley may look like a simple desert, but heat waves kill unprepared visitors every year. Antelope Canyon's beauty can vanish into flash floods within minutes. Survival follows rules as strictly as luck. Indigenous perspectives. The places often labeled as mysterious are not just puzzles for scientists or curiosities for tourists. They carry meaning for the communities tied to them. For the Okanagan people in British Columbia, Spotted Lake is sacred. Each of its circular mineral pools is connected with healing and peace. Modern visitors see chemistry shaping patterns in water, but for the Okanagan it remains a living site of ceremony, not a strange formation waiting to be explained away. Far to the south, the vast Sala de Uyuni is more than a salt flat dotted with tourists taking mirrored photos. In Inca cosmology, its expanse is wrapped into myths of deities, cosmic order, and natural cycles. What geology calls evaporated basins, local tradition frames as the residue of stories that explain human relationships with the land itself. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert floor as shapes recognizable only from above. Archaeological records focus on their size and age, but local interpretations connect many of them with fertility and water rituals, symbols linked not to mystery, but to sustaining life in a barren environment. Seeing them as sacred shifts perspective from abstraction to heritage still claimed today. Recent archaeological surprises. Some of the biggest surprises in archaeology over the last few years didn't close old debates. They opened new ones. Rupkund, better known as Skeleton Lake in the Himalayas, long carried a single theory. One tragic event left hundreds dead. But DNA analysis told a different story. Among the remains were individuals with Mediterranean ancestry, suggesting waves of migration rather than a single calamity. Instead of one frozen moment in time, the lake represents centuries of travel and encounters written into bone and genetics. Equally disruptive is the Antikythera mechanism. The fragments once seemed like little more than a broken astronomical device, but ongoing study proved it was far more advanced. With new pieces recovered in recent years, specialists reconstructed sections that function like an ancient computer, capable of modeling celestial cycles with a precision no one thought possible for its era. It wasn't isolated genius. It forces the question of how much knowledge in that world is still missing from the record. In 2024, LiDAR scanning of Guatemala's jungles revealed entire Maya cities hidden beneath dense canopy. Vast roads, defensive walls, and complex layouts surfaced digitally, showing a civilization linked across landscapes at scales historians never predicted. Space technology applications. The technology built to study space keeps circling back home, and in 2025, it is unlocking some of Earth's most persistent mysteries. Instruments engineered to map distant planets now scan the ground beneath our feet with the same precision. Satellite thermal imaging, originally designed to hunt for traces of ancient water on Mars, now identifies buried structures on Earth. By capturing minute temperature differences across the soil, these sensors reveal the outlines of old walls, lost canals, and foundations invisible to the naked eye. Entire settlements emerge as faint heat signatures recorded from orbit. That same approach also detects hidden water flows deep underground. What we used to suspect only through local drilling now appears clearly in data sets shared worldwide, exposing aquifers and ancient riverbeds long concealed by shifting deserts. From space, the dry world beneath the Sahara looks less empty and more like a fossil map of former climates. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station contribute another angle. Their cameras capture wide views of patterns like the Rikat structure in Mauritania or outbreaks of glowing plankton near coastlines. The irony is sharp. Tools built to explore Mars and beyond are now giving us a deeper view of Earth itself. Conservation efforts. From ancient stone rings to strange desert islands, a pressing question keeps surfacing. How do you preserve fragile mysteries when millions of people want to see them? Between 2023 and 2025, laws and conservation rules expanded in ways that would have seemed unlikely a decade earlier. Heritage authorities tightened access not to keep sites secret, but because constant foot traffic was leaving visible scars. For places with soft ground or weather-worn stone, even a few thousand extra visitors each year translated into erosion you could measure. Tourism boards and governments responded by capping daily visitor numbers, forcing lotteries for permits, or rerouting crowds onto reinforced paths. The goal was simple: protect the curiosity without stopping people from experiencing it altogether. At the same time, non-government organizations pushed for alternatives. Digital tourism became more widely promoted. Immersive VR tours, high-resolution scans, and live streams, offering the view without the pressure of thousands of boots on fragile soil. By 2025, the message is clear. These places cannot survive without deliberate policy and significant funding. Conservation isn't a passive effort anymore. It is the only way Earth's strangest features keep their shape for whoever comes next. Citizen science contributions. Not every breakthrough about strange places comes from research stations or government surveys. Increasingly, it's people with basic tools, drones, GoPros, and even smartphones who capture the evidence that professionals later build on. Footage posted online often reveals erosion, sinkholes, or patterns that had gone unnoticed by official teams, simply because citizens spend more time in these spaces and record almost everything they see. In 2022, amateur divers in Belize used video rigs to document blue holes beyond the depths previously charted. Their footage gave scientists an early look at unexplored chambers, directing expert expeditions later that year. In Mexico, organized groups of cavers traced unmapped branches of flooded cenotes, adding kilometers of passage to what was already known. Without their persistence, much of the current cave record would remain incomplete. The model extends beyond local expeditions. Tens of thousands of volunteer observers now upload photographs and sensor readings to shared platforms. Artificial intelligence sorts through this crowdsourced data, comparing patterns at scales no single team could manage. Layered together, amateur observations fuel discoveries that once required entire institutions. solving geographical mysteries is no longer the domain of experts alone. It's a collective effort. Future predictions. The next few decades will decide which of Earth's mysterious places survive and which fade into memory. Rising seas are already pressing against coastal sites, eroding cliffs, flooding ceremonial grounds, and creeping into soil that once stood firm. These changes don't arrive all at once. They build year by year until the loss feels permanent. For islands and shorelines, the clock now runs faster than the pace of restoration. Tourism, meanwhile, grows in scale and reach. Places that once saw a few thousand curious travelers every season now face hundreds of thousands each year. Trails were thin, stones crack under repeated impact, and photographs quickly become more common than the silence that gave some sites their power. Digital sharing magnifies the effect, drawing global attention, but also accelerating strain well beyond what local conditions can handle. Yet, in this same future, technology holds promise we cannot ignore. Drones, scanners, and sensors will continue to reveal places hidden until now, structures under jungle, caves beneath glaciers, or ecosystems locked in impossible depths. The real mystery will not vanish. It will shift, living just as much in what survives because it was protected as in what is newly found. From endless deserts to oceans deeper than mountains are tall, the world still holds places that resist neat explanations. Each new survey or discovery reminds us that research solves one puzzle while hinting at 10 more. The risks are real: floods, collapsing stone, erupting fire. But so is the fragility that makes preservation urgent. Mystery has never left us. It has only changed shape. It lingers in weathered carvings, vanishing coastlines, and caves untouched for millennia. Some answers may come with technology, others may never arrive. And that absence of certainty might be what keeps these places meaningful at all.